Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this latest narration in the web series Wearing Power Armor to a Magic School. If you're new to the series, there is a playlist listed down below in the description. And as always, I hope that you enjoy. Chapter 33, Skip Cutscene. A standout soon ensued, one that neither of us seemed to be willing to let up on. But as far as stare-downs went, this one was pretty evenly matched, as neither of us really had the ability to blink. Or at least as far as an outside observer could see. My whole shtick was pretty obvious. The tinted lenses were more or less just doing their job for me, taking blinking out of the equation entirely. And adding a solid +10 to my intimidation-based stats. The shadowy cloaked figure's approach was just downright bizarre though, as instead of eyes, there were just these two trapezoidal lights that I assumed were supposed to be placeholders for his actual eyes, hidden somewhere underneath the shadowy void cast by his hood. The void, which has downright pitch black and completely impenetrable to the naked eye. The figure gave off a surreal vibe of his rogue-like attire, coupled with the hood and the impenetrable shadow it casted. Looked like it had been ripped straight out of Castles and Wyverns art book at the high fantasy comic. The pitch black void that obscured his face and those two trapezoidal eyes had hovered and shifted with increasing scrutiny. Just didn't look real. Well, most would leave it at that. I wasn't one to leave mystery hanging. I was a human with an entire visual sensor suite to work with for crying out loud. So, before I even knew it, I reflexively went to activate my night vision cameras, only to see that the shadowy effect covering his face was still there. This led me to only one solid conclusion. Alert, localized surge of mana radiation detected, 140% above background radiation levels. A quick, localized environmental scan made it clear to me that this was yet another one of the Nexus's weird mana-fueled acts of tomfoolery. But say you first years, are you here for healing or are you here for a visit? For as I have stated, the healing wing is not accepting visits at this point in time, the hooded figure answered with a strange mix between a sing-song voice and an attempt at sounding gruff and gravelly. We have an unfulfilled point of personal privilege that requires redressment. Thassia stepped up to the plate, promptly placing herself by my side, then taking several steps forward, along with an unresolved conflict which requires immediate resolution by the party with which the aforementioned point of personal privilege was evoked, but has halted due to unforeseen circumstances. The princess began flexing her courtly talk with the hooded figure, which clearly seemed to have some effect as he reached up a single-gloved hand to where his chin should be, only to have his finger disappear as soon as it entered the dark, shadowy effect currently covering up his face. And with whom is this unresolved matter incurred? The figure inquired plainly, though the way he spoke shifted to something a bit more accommodating, perhaps even a little bit more hospitable than the gruffer tone he had initially directed towards us. An apprentice, good sir, apprentice Lariel, to be precise, Thassia clarified politely, using what I could only describe as a flightly, chirpy, almost haughty tone of voice that was an exaggerated version of the cadence she'd used during our first interactions together. The hooded figure replied with a concerned grumble. I was going to waive this particular matter, allowing the fair lady, he paused before making a point to stare at both me and Thalman, and her two knights to pass on through, under the point of exceptional circumstances, he continued in a less restrained, more flighty cadence. However, you must excuse my inability to do so, my lady. My hands are currently tied by the powers that be, and I simply cannot grant your request. The man began weaving a string of apologetics, giving Thassia a genuine and polite bow in response. I must apologize for this discrepancy in the expectant decorum. This didn't make things any better for our circumstances, though, and it was clear Thassia understood this as she echoed, pressing forward. May I have your name and title, my good sir? Thassia chirped lightly. Appointed Deputy Magistrate Sir Arlan Astoy, Senior Apprentice of the Transgression Academy for the Magical Arts. May I have the honor of knowing the privilege in requesting your name, my fair lady? On realm. Princess Thassia Delani of the Aetheron realm. First year and scholastic peer of the Transgression Academy for the Magical Arts. Thassia replied with a full bow and a half curtsy of her own. A pleasure to make your acquaintance, the shadowy figure bowed yet again. The pleasure is all mine, Sir Magistrate, followed by yet another bow by Thassia. There was some serious song and dance going on here, and one that I was observing with bated breath. Might I inquire further as to this particular reasoning behind the unfortunate and unseemly inability to respect the rights of expectant decorum? Thassia quickly shot back. As I have alluded to, Your Highness, the powers that be prevent me from furthering the natural solution to your particular grievances. If this were any other instance in time, at any other location or place, I'm sure this matter would have been resolved in an expectant and timely fashion. This situation, as you have alluded to yourself, results from a very particular set of unforeseen circumstances. Circumstances which currently dictate my actions in a manner which just so happens to be in conflict with your points of personal privilege, Your Highness. The man's posture, the way he stood, even the way he talked, seemed very particular when addressing Thassia. It was at that point that something changed. I didn't know what, and I wasn't sure why, but Thassia seemed to be shifting towards tactical retreat, as she clacked her beak several times before addressing the both of us. This is absolutely preposterous. I will need a moment to clear my mind, but when I do return, Thassia turned towards the magistrate, guard, apprentice, person yet again. There will be words exchanged. At Thassia's prompting, we all left the room, but not before slamming the door behind us shut in a similar manner to Eleanor's drama-filled exits. We continued walking away from the medical wing at a steady pace, until another privacy screen was suddenly brought up. Alert. Localized surge of mana radiation detected, 275% above background radiation levels. I have a plan, Thassia began, and this is entirely relying on you two having the physical prowess to back up your military backgrounds, she continued ominously. Oh, Princess, you sully the Havenbrock name if you believe my mercenary heritage is in any way, shape, or form a mere decorative masterpiece, Thalman responded with a sarcastic yet excitable tone. I assure you, Thassia, I think that my training has almost every eventuality accounted for, I added with an affirmative nod. So what's the plan? Thalman barked out excitedly, as we stopped right in the middle of this long, wide hallway connecting the main castle with the medical wing. Thassia was quick to answer this question by wordlessly gesturing to a lone door on the right side of the hallway. Windows lining either side of the hallway made it clear that this was just an elevated bridge connecting the main castle to an entirely separate compound. This made the presence of a door smack dab in the middle of its length sort of bizarre. Upon entering it, though, we were treated with an open-air rooftop terrace with a few seats and benches. The whole outcropping gave us an unparalleled view of the roaring waterfall beneath the academy and a direct line of sight to the medical wing and its 5 distinct towers. The princess continued walking silently as we reached the edge of the terrace's balcony, overlooking the sheer cliff face at a height that more or less put me in mind of a typical open-air rooftops of the typical A-cellar corridor skyscraper. I've observed that the medical wing seems to consist of a large tower atrium with several more towers connecting to it via additional corridors, similar to spokes in a wheel. As you can see from the vantage point, it seems as if most rooms have private balconies. If we cannot make our way into the apprentice via conventional channels, then I plan to reach her via more unconventional means. Thassia turned towards me with a hardened look in her gaze. Emma, is your insect artifice ready for use? My eyes widened at that as I nodded affirmatively. Just for the record, we call it a drone, I quickly corrected Thassia. But yes, I can designate individuals and targets for it to track down or follow. However, I can't just have it poking around in every room since there is no guarantee that the drone will be able to get a lock on them. There's too many variables involved that would get in the way of the drone actually being able to zero in on a person's face, from the beds facing the right way to bandages possibly covering the face too. I don't want your artifice to observe every balcony and window, Emma. That'll most certainly take too much time, as you've stated. There's no guarantee of actually identifying a face considering the multitudes of factors involved, Thassia interjected. What I plan to do is return to the deputy magistrate and attempt to reach a compromise that he will abide by. I plan for him to take us, or rather your drone, straight to the apprentice. And how would you accomplish this? Thalman whined, his head tilted curiously. I will draft a letter addressed directly to the apprentice and request that it be taken straight to her room. This way, the deputy magistrate will, in a sense, be able to accomplish his obligations to the expectant decorum, and in doing so, he will lead your drone straight to the apprentice's room. I stared at Thassia with wide eyes as her back and forth with the deputy magistrate began taking on a completely different meaning in this new light. That way I can find out exactly which room the apprentice is in, I replied bluntly. Correct. However, from there I cannot say my plans are in any way foolproof, Thasia replied in a sullen coo. Well, go on, Princess. It sounds pretty good so far, Thalman urged. Ascertaining the apprentice's room is only half of the stated objective. Actually getting there is another matter entirely, because depending on where the apprentice is located, my idea for the latter half is the quest involves you two skating your way towards her room. The princess spoke with an immense level of trepidation. On the exterior aspect of the castle, if that needs to be said. My heart skipped a beat as the princess laid out her plans. I looked across the absurdly spindly hallway bridge that this little terrace was somehow attached to, and towards the 5 towers made up the medical wing. Thalman did the same, although his face seemed to indicate that he was at the very least considering the plan at least somewhat seriously. All right, I muttered out loud, instinctively trying to place a palm on my forehead, only for the glove to bonk straight off. I have several ideas. First, we might be able to do this remotely. I'm thinking once we find out which room she's in, we fly in a larger drone, one carrying with it a deployable holographic projector or some other two-way communication device, so that we can talk to her remotely. As soon as I spoke that idea out loud, however, things started to fall apart. But because of how thick the walls are, and considering the distances between the towers and our dorm, I might have to deploy repeaters in order to daisy-chain the connection all the way back to the dorms. I mean, we can't just set up shop out here in the open after all. At which point, we'd have a continuous chain of signal repeater drones flying all across the academy, which wouldn't be ideal. No, scratch that. That won't work. The pair stared at me with varying degrees of confusion, but seemed to collectively decide to ignore the idea after I scrapped it. I say we climb it, Thalman yelped, but not before another idea hit me, one that could work, but that required me consulting Thasia first. I mean, we could, but I turned to face Thasia. What's the Academy's policy on noise? Or rather, do you think that we could get away with something that really, really loud, buzzing outside of towers? Thasia once more stared at me with a look of just utter confusion, but shrugged it off and went on with it anyways. I would highly recommend against generating too much noise for this particular quest, Emma. It would most certainly garner a lot of unwanted attention, Thasia spoke plain and simple. I couldn't help but groan internally in frustration at that. That makes flying over there a no-go. It would have made things so much easier, though. All right, well, that more or less places us in a very awkward situation with not a lot of options available to us. I thought to myself out loud again, as I craned my head over to an excitable Thalman. I guess I have to climb on over, I stated to no uncertain terms. Wait, I? Thalman responded with a shocked and incredulous bark. There is no way I'm allowing you to climb over there yourself without assistance or... Thalman, there is no need for you to climb over there with me, I interjected. This whole mission is hedged on me talking to the apprentice one-on-one, remember the gardens? The apprentice wouldn't allow you anywhere near us when we started talking. It'd be a waste of energy, and more importantly, a huge risk to your safety. I don't want to risk your life needlessly, Thalman, not especially for a fight that isn't your own. Well, you're part of our peer group, so it is my fight as well, Thalman replied with a dejected growl, but eventually relented. But you are right, Emma. I hate to admit it, but you are right. I nodded at Thalman slowly. Besides, there is an important job I need you to do. I began scrounging through one of my pouches and began palming for my spare in-ear piece. I need you on lookout to keep me aware of anything fishy developing in case I need to pull out. Thalman looked over the side of the terrace towards the raging waters beneath the side of the academy as he let out a sigh. That shouldn't be too hard. Hardly anyone will be passing by this terrace, and beyond that there is no way anyone can spot you from below, given there is nothing but cascading rapids below us. There is no one that can spot you from here, save for perhaps the foxes in the library. We're most certainly on the right side of the academy for this quest. That's for certain, Thalman pointed out the library in the far distance. Oh, I'm not too worried about anyone seeing me. I'm more concerned about someone compromising my extraction point, i.e. this little terrace here, I acknowledged. But surely you must be worried about someone seeing you scaling the walls. Thalman scanned me up and down, as if wanting to comment about my size, but you're massive. Okay, first off, rude, I spoke sarcastically, and raised both hands up for added effect. But in all seriousness, I have another device that can mask my visual presence. I pulled out a plastic-like poncho from one of my pouches, activating it and revealing its active camera properties as it projected whatever was behind it, albeit with some imperfections. It isn't perfect, but from afar it should actually work pretty well. Both Thelman and Thassia stared at each other in utter shock as they saw this. Hey, Mannerless, I think this is a matter worth discussing another time, Princess, Thelman interjected with a polite, exasperated breath. But I expect a good explanation for this one, Emma. Thelman pointed her fingers right at me. In any case, I will be diverting the Deputy Magistrate's attention by preoccupying him with needless and vapid chatter. This should take the attention away from the apprentice and your intrusion, Emma, Thassia quickly added, and probably tried this whole impromptu operation up nicely. All right, let's get the show on the road. We'll head back to the dorms and get the letter drafted, so... Already done, Thassia interjected, bringing up a parchment that she promptly began sealing into an envelope. Wait, when did you... Whilst you were talking, I used a dictation spell. The letter is written and signed, Thassia spoke nonchalantly, as she held a neatly sealed envelope in one of her talons. Wait, what? When did you... How did you? I'll carry a quill and extra parchment in my bag of holding. This is to account for any eventuality where a statement in writing, a legal affidavit, or a notarized letter may be required, Thassia responded as matter-of-factly. All right, then. I tapped the pouch of the infill drone, the small little thing peeking its head out, much to the visible disgust of the pair. So we're ready for phase 1 of the operation, misdirection and information gathering. We'll go in, drop the letter, and have the drone do its thing. After that, we wait for the drone to return, and we'll take it from there on whether or not we can continue with phase 2, penetrating the enemy lines. What would be stopping us from continuing with phase 2? Thelman quickly asked. Well, simple. If the apprentice is still conked out from her injuries, there wouldn't be any point in attempting to meet her. So hopefully she's going to be in a good enough state to talk to. We'll know when we get the drone footage back. Fair point, Thelman added. So, is everyone ready to begin? Thassia asked. A series of affirmative nods later, we began our quick walk back over to the atrium. The Transgration Academy for Magical Arts, Extraction Point Alpha, open-air terrace overlooking the medical wing. Local time, 14:20. Emma Booker. That took way more time than I initially thought. In fact, it took so long that I was beginning to wonder how two people could have an unending conversation when nothing of value was spoken and nothing of value was gained. It was basically elevator small talk, but written by the same people who brought Bridger Wesson Lane and the adapted to a theatrical release with a trilogy that ended with a movie arbitrarily cut up into two-parter. I honestly zoned out after a few moments during those hours, as I decided to use the spare time to review the grappling hook and mountaineering gear I'd be using on this little side quest. Eventually, however, the deputy magistrate relented, at which point I let loose the infill drone to do its thing. It had been 20 minutes since we left and made our way back to this open-air terrace, and all of us were waiting with bated breath for the results of the drone had in store. So how fast can the drone of yours fly anyways, Emma? Thelman was immediately cut off as the drone in question buzzed right by his ear, causing them to flick this way and that, before flattening entirely. Speak of him and he will come, I chuckled, as I outstretched the gloved hand over for the little drone to perch atop of. Once again, the pair stared at it with a look of mild disgust, and then panic, as it crawled all the way back into its docking port and began uploading the data we needed. All right, let's see what we have here. I spoke to no one in particular, before shifting my attention to the Evie. Evie, isolate and replay relevant footage and calculate the target's location. Acknowledged. Passing. Location passing. Footage isolated. Play footage? Affirmative. I immediately pulled out my data tab for the gang to be able to watch as well, as the footage began just as the deputy magistrate, and by extension the drone, arrived at the apprentice's room. The door and all the details posted on the front were all captured, and so too was the state of the apprentice revealed to us in short order, as I braced myself for a mangled and bandaged up mass of broken bones. What I instead saw was still a heavily bandaged up figure. However, the most important thing was that they were awake. And what was remarkable was the fact that they were able to move without assistance, as the apprentice reached over to receive the letter wordlessly, shifting a bit in bed as she did so. This is a letter addressed from the Princess Thassia, Delini of the Aetheron realm. I have fulfilled my duties and obligations as per expected decorum. I will now take my leave, Apprentice L'Oreal. The deputy magistrate spoke, with the same air of overbearing promptness, seriously making me consider whether or not this was how he was all the time. Whatever the case may be, the apprentice seemed to be healed enough to move her arms at the very least, as she grabbed the letter and spoke hoarsely back in response. Thank you, senior apprentice. There wasn't much to the footage beyond those interactions, but it was good enough for the purposes of this mission. All right, I spoke as I pocketed the tablet. We have our answer. The apprentice seems healed up enough to speak, so phase 2 of this preparation is a go. The pair nodded in response, just in time for Evie to be done with whatever calculations were needed to determine the apprentice's precise location. I turned to the tower as the room on its balcony was highlighted. It was about 5 stories above where we were, meaning it'd be a hell of a climb. The room's about 5 floors up, I announced with a sigh. Are you certain you can make that journey, Emma? Dacia responded worryingly. I will be honest, Emma. I am having some second doubts about with this whole idea. The concept just came to me as flying between tall structures and towers is just second nature to the Aether Realmers. Considering the heights involved and your inability to fly, I'm wondering if this whole quest was folly on my own short-sighted. It's fine, Dacia. I cut the Avanar off. I can do this, trust me. I placed a single hand on the princess's shoulder and squeezed it once for effect. Meanwhile, the Eevee began doing what it did best, attempting to minimize the risk associated with my harebrained schemes, as it deployed the suit's primary lookout drone in order to start mapping out the best possible routes forward. This spooked the pair yet again, as they both jolted backwards. Thankfully, the drone was deathly silent, so it didn't bring too much attention to it. It was at this point I brought out a pair of earpieces I was scrounging my partridge for earlier, one for Dacia and another for Thalman. These will help you stay in contact with me throughout the climb, I stated plainly, as I attempted to latch it onto my own ear for demonstrative purposes, only to realize that I could not, given the suit was in the way. I sighed as I turned towards Thalman. Do you mind if I put it on for you? I asked sheepishly. What is it, Emma? I paused, as I attempted to find a best way to describe this without taking up too much time. It's a communication device, Salman, that'll allow us to talk to each other remotely, relying on that drone there. I pointed at the lookout drone still flying from us, to relay our voices to each other. Thalman, as expected, looked at me with an expression of partial dumbfoundedness, whilst Dacia seemed completely transfixed by the earpieces I held in my hands. So it's like hearing sense? Thalman responded with a questioning bark. Look, I'll just demonstrate. I managed out with a sigh as Thalman reluctantly nodded and allowed me to begin hooking the earpiece, looping it around his fluffy triangular ears. This inevitably resulted in my hand brushing over the Lupinar's fluffy head a few times, which seemingly elicited a large tail wags and a dulcet rumble. I tried to ignore that, as I pulled back and began demonstrating. I've turned off my speaker. Can you still hear me, Thalman? Yes, I can. The Lupinar spoke after clearing his throat. I turned my speakers back on immediately. All right, I'll get into the specifics of how it works later, but as for now, just know that I can hear whatever you say. I'm afraid I don't think that artifice will be compatible with my anatomy, Emma. Dacia spoke calmly, as she pointed at several aspects of the earpiece that required an actual ear canal to fit into, and an earlobe to loop around. This complicates things a bit, but it shouldn't be too difficult. How long do you think you can keep up the distracting conversation with the deputy magistrate for, Dacia? We just went through several hours of discussing nothing in particular. I can most certainly continue that trend from dusk till dawn, the Avanar spoke confidently, and frankly, rather proudly. This issue lies not in how long I can manage to maintain the conversation, but in how long it'll take you to accomplish this quest, Emma, Dacia shot back. An hour, I nodded confidently. 20 minutes to scoot my way over, and there, and 20 to talk to the apprentice, and then 20 back. I'll make it 2 hours then, Dacia responded without a second thought. We need to account for potential complications, and an extra hour of senseless dialogue will most certainly not be an issue for me. With an affirmative nod from me and the approving glance from Thalman, I now turned towards the exterior of the 200-foot corridor leading towards a concourse, and the extra 500 feet it would take to get from the atrium to the tower in question. It was at the last minute that the Eevee brought up yet another suggestion, one that was formulated with the aid of new datasets provided by the FEB NPMS lookout drone that had been busy mapping the best route forward. It was an inherently riskier approach, One that my aunt would definitely not approve of, but it definitely beats scaling a wall and wedging spikes into it. Actually, I have a better idea than simply scaling the walls. The Transgression Academy for the Magical Arts en route to Medical Wing Tower C, room 705, local time 14:30 hours. Emma Booker. Grapple secure. I'll never forget the feeling of falling. The very wrong feeling that came with leaping off the solid ground into empty sky, of suddenly seeing and feeling the world whizzing by. It was a visceral feeling, a gut-churning sensation, dominated by an overbearing sense of impending doom that takes over your terrestrial brain that wasn't designed to feel this freeing sensation of being unbound to the ground beneath you. Leaping over from the edge of the terrace was the worst part of it, but after the tentative jump, things started to become just a little bit easier. The Academy's proclivity for over-aggrandizing architectural design would finally serve a purpose beyond the decorative aesthetics, because it was clear that the walls weren't really designed to ward off anyone daring to scale them, as there existed several, if not hundreds, of these little greebles and outcroppings that served no purpose but to act as decorative pieces on the side of the castle. Some held stone flowers, whilst others had lamps and other light pieces of varying designs. No matter what they were, or what meaning they held, all were equal and valid targets in the eyes of my grappling hook. As I dangled there from the first outcropping, held in place by a single high-tensile cable, I looked up to see Thelman looming over the edge. "Emma!" I heard him shout in panic. It was clear that he was unable to see anything, just my light refraction cloak was currently doing its job well. "I'm still here, Thelman. You can't see me, but I'm dangling from this weird outcropping that looks like an overinflated vase. Next time, be sure to inform me that is the nature of your impossible artifices before use. Understand?" "Of course. You'll know I've fallen if you hear a long scream, followed by a large splat. That's not funny." I chuckled nervously in response before turning to face the grueling, gut-churning journey ahead of me. Humor's my way of dealing with stress, and trust me, I have a lot of stress to work through right about now. End of chapter. I'd quickly like to thank the T5 peeps: Cold War Boomerwaffen, Severin Cerberus, Bushmaster 177, HenryTheRed, Casper Arnholtz, Cold War Boomerwaffen, Elijah Silvercross, Dragzoon W.R.E, and Severin Cerberus. Thank you very much.